Okay, members, we can now move on to a question to the Minister of Justice, which were deferred from yesterday. And can I obviously at this point say that I wish the Justice Minister better health today. Question 8 has been withdrawn, and I call Urlia Flynn.
Question number 1, please.
Mr Speaker, thank you for allowing me to defer until today, and with your permission I want to answer questions 1 and 7 together. On the 21st of September, I announced my intention to establish a Victims of Crime Commissioner designate for Northern Ireland and intend to launch a public appointment competition for the role and the position imminently. The Victims of Crime Commissioner designate will fulfil a new and important role and will provide a voice for victims of crime, promote best practice and drive improvements in relation to policies, practices and services to meet the needs of victims of crime. This is a significant step forward. The new Commissioner-designate will represent all victims of crime, as well as having a focus on specific needs of particularly vulnerable groups of victims, including victims of domestic abuse and of hate crime. Details of the competition will be published on my department's website in due course, and the position will also be advertised through the recruitment pages of the 3 local newspapers. My intention is to appoint a Victims of Crime Commissioner-designate before the end of the mandate.
Urlia Flynn, supplementary.
Yeah, and thanks very much to the Minister for that response. The Minister will know that the wider impact of crime goes well beyond the criminal justice system, and a lot of times it impacts on the health and mental health of the victim. And I would just like to ask, will the Victims of Crime Commissioner designate have any responsibility in relation to the Department of Health, and will they be able to make recommendations to the Health Minister, as an example? Thank you.
Part of the purpose of setting this up as a designate office in the first instance is to work with the Victims of Crime Commissioner to scope out the kind of powers that may be necessary for the permanent post once we put that on a legislative footing. And so I would certainly be interested to hear feedback both from victims and indeed from the ultimate post holder of the designate office as to just what kind of recommendations they may bring, whilst their main focus will be on the justice system and how victims are supported through the justice system, in the same way as victim support continues to support people beyond the point where they leave the justice system. I would be hopeful that a Victims of Crime Commissioner would also be able to take that wider horizon and consider where there is a necessity for better joined up working between different departments in order to support victims of crime.
Jonathan Buckley.
Can I thank the Minister for her answer thus far and also welcome her back to the Chamber. Minister, can I ask why the decision has been taken not to place the Commissioner on a statutory footing?
There is not sufficient time in this mandate to legislate for that, Mr Speaker, and therefore we decided to proceed on the basis of a designate Commissioner with the legislation to follow in the next mandate.
Sinead Bradley.
Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her reply so far. I'd like to welcome the announcement of the Victims of Crime Commissioner, albeit on a designate basis. But would the Minister tell us if she anticipates the Commissioner designate or the Commissioner themselves to be dealing with, beyond the victims issue, also looking at issues around witnesses?
The specific purpose of the Victims of Crime Commissioner will be to look at issues that impact directly on victims. However, as the member will recognise, many victims are also witnesses within the justice system, and so there will be a degree of overlap. However, for those who are witnesses to crime and not victims of crime or affected directly by crime, there are, of course, other mechanisms through which they can seek support as they go through the justice system.
Call Robbie Butler. Call John Blair.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the questioner on the original question referenced the wide range of issues that are impacted here, and also there's a wide range of people affected. Can I ask the Minister what support is in place for bereaved families of those killed by dangerous drivers?
Well, obviously the issue specifically around dangerous driving and death by dangerous driving is an area in which I've taken particular interest over the last number of years. In terms of the sentencing, as the member will be aware, I have made decisions in respect of the increased penalties that I would wish to see for death by dangerous and careless driving, and those are actually now being proceeded with by the Department in terms of the drafting of a sentencing bill for the next mandate. In terms of the support that is available, there are many different groups which support those who have suffered bereavement as a result of crime and indeed as a result of dangerous driving. However, I am very much indebted to those families who have been through that particular trauma for their feedback on the sentencing consultation which we did earlier in the year, and indeed it is as a result of discussing with them their journey through the justice system that we have arrived at the conclusions that we have. I have to say also that many of them raised issues that they had going through the court system, and additional changes have been made in terms of how sentencing is announced within the court system and the support that is necessary for families in those circumstances as a direct result of the contact that we have had with those families.
Moving on, I call Sinead McLaughlin.
Question to Minister.
I first of all want to start by acknowledging that the LGBTQ community is not immune to domestic abuse. In fact, statistics shared with my department by the Rainbow Project and CaraFriend during the development of an e-learning package on the new domestic abuse offence indicates that domestic abuse has been experienced by 1 in 4 lesbian and bisexual women and 4 in 10 gay and bisexual men. In addition, they have advised that 80% of transsexual people have experienced domestic abuse from a partner or ex-partner. In reality, we know that non-reported incidents of domestic abuse could, in fact, be much higher. I am also acutely aware of the specific barriers that people in the LGBTQ community may encounter in accessing support and the additional abuse that they can face. The e-learning package and awareness-raising tool which my department and its partners are developing seeks to raise awareness of this and highlight the support that is available to those in the LGBTQ+ community. In relation to introducing a database for recording incidents of domestic violence against those in the LGBTQ+ community, this is primarily an operational police matter in the context of information that is recorded more generally. I understand the potential benefits of better data collection, although it needs to be manageable within the operational context. As you will appreciate, I can't interfere in police operational matters, which are the responsibility of the Chief Constable.
Supplementary, Sinead McLaughlin.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer. But do you agree that a database could be useful when it comes to encouraging victims within the LGBT community to actually report incidents of domestic violence, bearing in mind that there are probably, research shows probably about 64% of crime against this group is not reported?
I think it is hugely important that we first of all try to gather as much evidence as possible when it comes to the issue of domestic abuse and violence and how it affects different parts of our society. And so I have no objection if the Chief Constable decides that that is something for which he has both the resources and indeed the technical ability to collect, if it indeed helps them to shape their response. However, I think in terms of encouraging people to come forward, it is less about statistics and more about the reassurance that when people do present either to the PSNI or to any of the various support networks that they may report to with domestic abuse, that their concerns will be taken seriously, that their voice will be heard, and that the response they receive will be adequate to support them through what is a traumatic time. And so for me, I think that much of what we're doing in terms of the training and learning that goes with the new domestic abuse offence is incredibly important to ensure that members from different communities, including the LGBTQ+ community, are able to access those services and have full confidence in them.
Sinead Ennis.
Minister, Clause 31 of the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act provides for DOJ to issue guidance about information and data collection to the PPS, PSNI and other additional bodies. Can you confirm, has the Department issued any such guidance to date?
Not that I'm aware of at this stage, and obviously the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act is not enacted at the moment. So whilst it is an act, it hasn't actually been commenced. We hope that that will happen towards the end of this year, early next year. And there may then be opportunities if we believe that there is evidence or information that needs to be collected which would be of assistance in terms of monitoring the operation of that particular piece of legislation, that we can do so. And I think that that is the context in which that particular clause in the bill was drafted.
Andrew Muir.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her responses. The legislation which was recently passed, as the Minister has outlined, is in the process of being enacted, will have a positive impact in enabling the Minister and the Department to tackle domestic violence. Does the Minister agree with me that this is yet another reason why these institutions need to be kept, where we need to support devolution to be able to get legislation passed to safeguard people from domestic violence and other issues in our society?
Well, I thank my colleague for that question, and I think obviously I would agree with him entirely that it is important that these institutions are able to make progress. Mr Speaker, it will not be lost on you and your office just how busy the legislative programme has been in these last 18 months, much more so even than in many other 5-year terms, and I think that that is evidence of the desire for people in this place to make change. I think it's evidence of the desire of the community to see change delivered, and I think that it would be a lost opportunity where we find ourselves in a situation where many pieces of legislation, where many pieces of progress that can be made by the decisions taken in this House were to be lost if this place were to collapse.
Colin Rosemary Barton.
Thank you, Minister, for your answers so far. Can the Minister advise when she intends to introduce new domestic abuse protection notices and orders?
The work on that particular piece is ongoing. It will be introduced hopefully within this mandate, but there is some considerable work that needs to be done in terms of aligning the computer systems and the operationalisation of that piece of work, but it is something that we continue to make progress with. It is important to say that those additional protections, of course, are there to supplement protections which are already available to people who find themselves in that situation, and so it is important that people make full use of the protections that are already there in the interim, but I would be keen to see those brought forward as swiftly as possible, because I believe that they, in particular, remove some of the onus on the victim to have to seek out that protection and place that responsibility with the PSNI, which I think is a better location for it to lie.
And I call Maurice Bradley.
Mr Speaker, question 3.
The public protection arrangements for Northern Ireland, PAPANI, bring together a number of agencies, including probation, police, social services, prison service and the housing executive, to share information and provide effective assessment and management of risks posed by certain individuals convicted of sexual offences. Under PAPANI, there are 3 categories of risk. Individuals assessed as Category 1 require no multi-agency intervention, but all those assessed as Category 2 or 3 are allocated a designated risk manager. If the individual is subject to statutory supervision with the probation board, a probation officer will act as risk manager. Where the individual is not subject to licensed supervision, the PSNI undertake this role. For these Category 2 and 3 offenders, the risk assessment and risk management plan is reviewed by a local area public protection panel every 16 weeks. It is the designated risk manager's responsibility to coordinate all elements of the risk management plan and ensure it is delivered when and as agreed. The Sexual Offences Act 2003 requires certain individuals who have been convicted of sexual offences to be subject to notification requirements with the police. Such individuals are required to notify if they change address, stay at another address for 7 days or more, and if they are travelling outside the UK for 3 days or more. It also introduced a number of civil preventative orders. Individuals subject to statutory supervision with the probation board, either on a community order or a licence following a custodial sentence, are managed in line with probation board's practice standards. The level of contact is determined by their assessed level of risk and includes planned and unannounced home visits. A specialist risk assessment tool is used to assess treatment needs and helps predict reoffending. It provides an evaluation of 13 risk factors that focus on the offence history, enduring psychological characteristics and current behaviour of the individual. The factors identified become treatment and supervision targets within the overall risk management plan for that individual. Probation Board delivers a number of accredited group work programmes to address sexual offending, including specialist programmes for those under the age of 18 years who have committed sexually harmful behaviour and to address internet offending.
Maurice Bradley, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you very much, Minister. Minister, there are around 1,500 registered sex offenders in Northern Ireland, 16 of which are just women, and 413 living in the Belfast area. I don't think police could possibly devote the time necessary to monitor the movements of such criminals. Nor the landlords, nor the housing executive, nor the statutory organisations can devote the time and manpower and resources to do this job properly. Therefore, Minister, does your department have any plans to make relevant information on sex offenders more available to the public? People who are worried about their children being near such people, vulnerable adults being near such people. Is there any way that more information can actually go out to the public?
Mr Speaker, there is already considerable information which is released to the public. For example, when people apply for employment or for volunteering opportunities with vulnerable categories of people, they do have to declare any sexual offending behaviour. Where an individual is unlicensed within the community, obviously the DOJ has authority to revoke the licence and recall an individual to custody where they are considered that the risk posed by the offender can't be safely managed in the community. In addition, a breach of a sexual offences prevention order is an arrestable offence. Where an individual subject to a SOPO breaches the term of the order, the PSNI will arrest the individual and initiate criminal proceedings. Many of those in the community, as I say, are not just monitored by the police service, but are also monitored by Probation Board. And indeed, last week when I met with Probation Board as part of Hidden Heroes Day, I spoke to those who actually have the rather difficult task of monitoring sexual offenders and talked to them about the complex work that they undertake. They are highly skilled people. And they take their job incredibly seriously because they recognise that it is part of their role in keeping people safe.
Recall Gemma Dolan.
And I thank the Minister for her answers so far. Minister, would you be able to clarify how people convicted of a sexual offence abroad and who now live in the north will be subject to monitoring arrangements?
I would have to come back to the member in writing on that particular issue. I know that someone who commits an offence here, leaves the jurisdiction and comes back is certainly on our register. I know also that those who have come from other parts of these islands will be notified to the PSNI. But in terms of people who are travelling internationally who have sexual offences in their criminal record, it is most likely to come to note, for example, when criminal record checks are undertaken for employment and other things. But I can respond to the member more fully in terms of how we actually take that forward, and also perhaps the reverse in terms of how we inform other jurisdictions if someone leaves this jurisdiction to live elsewhere.
Justin McNulty.
Can I ask the Minister, has she given consideration to a child sex offender disclosure scheme similar to Sarah's Law as was rolled out in 2011 in England and Wales?
It isn't something that I have given consideration to at this point in time, although obviously I'm always open to look at the evidence for such registers. I think that part of the difficulty here is that we are trying to protect people in a proportionate way, and I think that there is a danger, particularly with sex offenders, that it can be difficult to manage that if people are, for example, constantly moving because the public become aware of where they are, and we end up with people, for example, being harassed at their position where they live. That can actually make it more complicated for the monitoring that is in place and the robust monitoring from Probation Board and the PSNI to be effective. So there is a balance in all of these things, but I'm more than happy if the member would like to make an appointment to come and talk to me about his concerns. I'm more than happy to consider them.
Move on to Meg Nesbitt.
Question 4, Mr Speaker.
Firstly, I wish to reiterate the comments that I made previously and say how pleased I am that the important scheme is now operational and applications are being submitted to the Victims Payment Board. I trust the scheme will have a positive impact on the many victims and survivors who have suffered a permanent disablement as a result of a Troubles-related incident. In line with the Victims Payment Regulations 2020, my department was designated by the Executive Office to exercise the administrative functions of the Victims Payment Board on the Board's behalf. A project team was established within the department to put in place the necessary arrangements to support administration of the scheme. That included development of an application form and accompanying guidance for approval by the Victims Payment Board, development of a website for the board, and also a portal to accept online applications. Arrangements were also put in place with a range of organisations with which the Victims Payment Board will engage to access information to assist with the assessment of applications. My department is also responsible for providing the necessary number of staff to support the administration of the scheme, subject to the approval of the Executive Office. That includes a secretary to the Victims Payment Board, and accommodation has also been secured for the administration team, and the necessary IT equipment has been provided to staff to enable them to carry out their roles. My department also arranged procurement of the service for assessing the level of permanent disablement of applicants to the scheme. This contract was awarded to Capita in February this year, and my department has ensured implementation of the necessary arrangements so that Capita can accept referrals from the Victims Payments Board.
Mike Nesta, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister have any concerns about the performance of any third party engaged in supplying the service?
With respect to their service, in specific respect to the Victims Payment Board and this particular scheme, it is too early to judge how the performance will be, because we're still at the very earliest stages of applications and assessments. However, it is something that we will keep under review, given the very negative assessments of some of those third sector bodies in terms of their delivery around, for example, the PIP scheme, and it is something that we are aware of. However, we're also conscious that it is a very different scheme, a very different contract, and monitored in a very different way, and we hope that that provides reassurance to those who apply.
I call Daniel McCrossan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answers to the questions so far. Minister, you have said that there will be additional support made available to organisations representing victims following the commencement of the Troubles Permanent Disablement Payment Scheme. But which voluntary organisations, Minister, and have you any indication of how much extra support?
Well, I thank the member for his question, but he has, of course, raised the area that we are not responsible for in the Department of Justice, and that is funding to victims and survivors organisations. I do know that there have been advice workers placed in a number of those organisations in order to help those who need to come forward to fill in application forms, and they are there to do that free of charge. I know that some victims have been approached by those who have, from solicitors, who have suggested that they can do so for a fee of £500, and I would take this opportunity again just to remind those who are listening that there is no need to pay for legal advice in order to fill in the forms. There are those in terms of the organisations themselves who will be able to do that, and the Executive Office, I know, has set aside money for that purpose, and those advocates are now in place and undertaking the work that is required of them.
I call John Blair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I also thank the Minister for her answers thus far? And can I ask the Minister what measures the Department has taken to protect victims and survivors from scams or potential scams in relation to the Troubles Permanent Disabled Payment Scheme?
Well, I thank the member. Yes, we did. We were obviously aware that there were some who were soliciting business on the basis that if people paid a fee, they would receive assistance from an organisation in order to complete their forms. There were a number of things happened. The Law Society put out a very strongly worded statement reminding solicitors that they had a duty not to solicit for business in that way. The Victims Payment Board themselves, when alerted to the issue, also put out a statement to stress the fact that whilst, of course, victims are free to seek legal advice if they wish, they are under no obligation to do so, and the scheme is designed in such a way that it should not be necessary. Further, by putting in place, as we have done, advocates to assist those who need to fill in the forms and perhaps require some assistance with it, we hope that that will be avoided in future. I think it is important to say that the victims' organisations within which these advocates are embedded are fully aware and have been are very clear with people who ask for their assistance. You do not need to have had previous engagement with those organisations. You do not need to be a member of those organisations or have a pre-existing relationship with them in order to benefit from that advocacy scheme. It is there for anyone who chooses to apply to the scheme. And it is important, I think, that people know that that advice is there for them free of charge and available so that they can fill in the form to the best of their ability and hopefully have a smooth run in terms of going through the application process.
And I call Pam Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 5.
The member will be aware that the funding package accompanying the New Decade New Approach document falls well short of the amount needed to deliver all the priorities set out by the British and Irish governments, and that delivery of additional police numbers to 7,500 is therefore largely dependent on the availability of executive funding. In light of the NDNA commitment, my department submitted bids to the Department of Finance in January, September and November 2020 to increase the number of police officers to 7,500. In addition to the final opening 2021-22 budget, PSNI was allocated an in-year allocation of £12.3 million. £9.8 million of this will enable the PSNI to retain their police numbers of approximately 7,000, with £2.5 million enabling the recruitment of 100 additional officers in 2021-22 towards the police officer numbers in the NDNA document of 7,500. I will continue working with executive colleagues, including the Minister of Finance and with the Chief Constable, to ensure that we have a police service that is properly resourced in all aspects for the challenges it faces.
Supplementary, Palm Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her response. The public want to see visible policing on the ground and in communities, providing reassurance, building relationships and deterring crime. Does the Minister agree that much more effort is required to increase our neighbourhood policing teams and to ensure more officers are on the ground and on our streets?
Well, I understand that following the uplift of 400 additional officers into neighbourhood policing teams, there are currently 719.5 established posts within neighbourhood policing across the PSNI. However, decisions relating to the allocation of police officers within the PSNI are entirely a matter for the Chief Constable, who is accountable to the Policing Board. I'm committed to respecting his independence and indeed their role, and so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment in terms of where additional officers should be located.
I call Liz Cummins.
I thank the Minister for answers so far. Minister, as you've stated, the funding provided by the British Government to meet the priorities set out in the NDNA is far short of what is needed. Can I ask the Minister, therefore, have you engaged with the British Government to push for adequate funding to ensure that the numbers of additional police officers will be met by the end of this mandate? Thank you.
It is an issue that we have raised with the Northern Ireland Office and through the Northern Ireland Office, but also through the Minister of Finance, who ultimately is responsible for allocating the budget to executive departments. And so we will continue to raise that issue. It is obviously an issue in terms of reaching the 7,500 officers. However, the NDNA commitments, much as they were long, were very non-specific in that it didn't actually give any completion date for many of the targets that were set. And I think without completion dates and clarity, it's really very meaningless in terms of what we can try to achieve. I have focused on trying to ensure that I get the best possible settlement for the Department of Justice. And that we pass on that opportunity to the Chief Constable to be able to increase numbers if he feels that that's where that money is best spent. But ultimately it is a matter of resourcing. We haven't seen the budgets beyond 2021-22, and so it's impossible to tell where we will be in 1, 2 or 3 years' time. It would be fair to say, based on the evidence gathering exercise which is ongoing at the minute, none of it looks particularly optimistic.
Call Dolores Kelly.
Mr Speaker, and I declare an interest as a member of the Policing Board. Minister, you will be aware that the Police Service is going to recruit over 340 officers later this year, and also I'm sure of the trend where we have seen an increased number of recruits from the LGBTQ community, as well as black, minority, ethnic and indeed the Protestant working class, but a very worrying downward spiral in terms of representation from the Catholic nationalist community. So I wonder, Minister, are you sure and reassured that all that needs to be done is being done, and whatever affirmative actions are available to the Chief Officer are being engaged?
Well, with respect, I think it is a matter for the member, as a member of the Policing Board, to reassure herself in her engagement with the Chief Constable and indeed with her colleagues on the Policing Board that such measures are in place, because that is the right place for that to be looked at. It is important that we have a police service which is reflective of our community in all its parts, and that does require that we encourage as many people as possible from underrepresented groups to come forward. I certainly will continue to do that in anything that I say and do, and I trust that the member will continue to do likewise, because I believe that as political leaders and indeed as community leaders, when we speak out and encourage people to come forward, that too can have an impact in terms of whether or not people decide to apply.
That ends the period for list of questions. We now move on to 15 minutes of topical questions. Questions 8 and 9 have been withdrawn, and I call Steve Aiken.
Thank you very much indeed. May I thank the Minister indeed for her answers so far, and may I indeed welcome her back and hope everything is well. As the Justice Minister, do you have any concerns about the large number of changes and resignations from the senior leadership team of the PSNI we've been experiencing over the last couple of months?
It would be inappropriate, I think, for me to comment on changes in the senior management and leadership team in the PSNI, beyond congratulating those who have moved on to more senior positions, because I think that it shows that those officers have been well trained and are well placed to take up senior roles in other places. In any organisation, of course, the degree of flux which the organisation is subject to will have an impact, and it would be good, I think, for everyone if there was a period of stability, but the world rarely works in that way. And so, from my perspective, it is for the Policing Board and for the Chief Constable to work through those vacancies, to work through those changes, and to do so in a way that maintains confidence in policing and indeed maintains operational capacity. I believe that they are doing so, and I would certainly be happy to speak to any member who is of a contrary view.
Supplementary, Steve Egan.
I thank the Justice Minister for her comments so far, but as she is aware, any significant changes, including the number of significant changes within the PSNI, does have a worrying effect on morale. As the Justice Minister, she must be aware of the impact on PSNI morale at the moment. Has she taken the opportunity to assess that morale, or is that just an operational matter or a matter for the Policing Board?
Well, the member talks about things being just a matter for the Chief Constable or the Policing Board, and in doing so, he does both the Chief Constable and the Policing Board, including his colleagues who sit on it, a grave disservice. It is not that things are not important. It is that they are not part of my remit, Mr Speaker, and it is important for me to respect the integrity of the Policing Board as they do their work. They are best placed to assess whether there are major changes and what impact that is having. And I am sure, like everyone else, it is difficult to manage an organisation where there is much change, but in an organisation the size of the PSNI, there will be much change. And managing that change is part of the role of the Chief Constable and the Policing Board. I have confidence in both to do that well, and I'm sad that the member feels that because I am not involving myself in things that are not my business, that it means that I don't believe they're important, because he would be very mistaken in taking away that view.
Paul Gemma Dolan.
The Minister may be aware that since the High Street Voucher Scheme was announced, there have been a number of reports of scammers calling door-to-door, attempting to target older people and vulnerable people. What work is your department engaged in to tackle this crime?
Well, I thank the member for her question. As she will be aware, the Department of Justice, the PSNI and other agencies are engaged with the Scamwise Partnership NI. And part of that is, first of all, to identify those scam opportunities that people are picking up on, and then to disseminate through a whole variety of different media, whether social media or printed leaflets or whatever it may be, radio advertising, the risk to people around scams, also giving people the tools to be able to identify a scam, which in many cases is quite complex because they are more and more sophisticated. And so it is important that that happens. We, as part of the Scamwise Partnership, obviously also rely heavily on other government departments if they find that there are areas where scams are particularly prevalent within their own particular remit, that they would let us know of that, and then we can talk to Scamwise in terms of how we can tailor the response to deal with those specific issues. But I think dealing with scams is something that all of us would want to see done. These are people who are preying on some of the most vulnerable people in our community, and I think it's incredibly important that we get the proper information and helpful information out to the people who need it.
Gemma Dolan, supplementary.
Thank you, and I thank the Minister for her answer. In terms of the High Street Voucher Scheme specifically, were there any conversations prior to the rollout of it which anticipated potential scams, or were any preventative measures put in place, or was it just the Scamwise Partnership?
From my perspective, there were no particular issues that were brought in place. However, I know that my colleague has highlighted the issue to the public, and has, I think, number of other MLAs, to make sure that people are very careful around particularly cold callers at people's homes, which I think happened in a number of council areas, telling people that they could apply for the voucher. So as with any scam, it's hard to predict what form it will take, but once we're aware of it on the ground, we can respond to it. And of course, October marks Cyber Month. The Northern Ireland Cyber Security Centre are running a series of events over the next month focusing on raising awareness and safety around online scams and harms, and Scamwise Northern Ireland is part of that process.
Call Tom Buchanan.
Mr Speaker, and thank the Minister for her questions thus far. Can the Minister outline what steps she will take to inform retired prison officers of their eligibility for the Police Rehabilitation and Retraining Trust?
That work is ongoing. As you're aware, we have made a formal announcement of that, and obviously through Prison Service and also through the POA, but also through those who would continue to connect with the Prison Service. We intend to continue to feed that information out. It is important that those who leave the Prison Service, irrespective of the manner of their departure, are able to access services that are available, particularly those who have suffered trauma. And so we are reaching out through the Prison Officers Association and through Prison Service itself, who do maintain good links with former officers, to try and ensure that they are fully aware of the extra help that will be available as a result of the package of measures that we announced in January.
Supplementary, Tom Buchanan.
Thank the Minister for her response. The Minister will know that obviously this scheme was established some 22 years ago to assist families in making a transition back into the public life again. And the programmes that's been delivered by it is of extreme help to the families. And I'm sure she will agree that prison officers face exactly the same problems and difficulties as police officers do. So the sooner that this information is got out to the prison officers, then the better for them.
Absolutely agree, and indeed I will be visiting PRRT later this week in order to engage with them, to see more of the work that they do, and hopefully also to have this conversation with them in terms of how they will actually deliver this, both to police officers and to prison officers, who I completely agree undertake a very difficult job in often very challenging circumstances, and I never fail to be impressed by the work that they do.
Jerry Carroll.
Speaker, Minister, I'd like to ask your assessment of the deeply disturbing and concerning news that at least 39 police officers have been subject to internal investigation over allegations of sexual misconduct in the last 5 years.
Well, I think, Mr Speaker, like everyone in the chamber, we have all been touched by what happened in the case of Sarah Everard. It has brought home, I think, a reality for many women in our society, that even those who appear to be figures of trust are often predators. And that fear that lies with every woman who is alone, who is trying to go from A to B, go about their daily business, and may be preyed on by someone, I think is all the more acute at this time. And having listened to the evidence, having listened to the witnesses and to the family, having watched the videos, it is a very chilling thing to think that someone in such a position of authority, someone to whom we would turn for help, would abuse that position in such an egregious way. In terms of the PSNI, first of all, I think it is hugely important that the PSNI continue to do the work that they do in terms of challenging culture within the organisation, to ensure that misogyny and sexism are tackled in the same way they would any other form of prejudice. I also believe that it is important that we have confidence as a community in being able to go to the PSNI if we are victims of domestic violence or sexual assault. I know that the PSNI are rolling out training at the moment as a result of the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Bill, and I hope that training in itself will highlight some of the key behaviours that are of concern. I am aware that disciplinary matters are often spread across a number of different departments. Some will have been dealt with within the PSNI, some will be dealt with by the Ombudsman's Office, and I am aware that not all the cases to which the member has referred in terms of numbers may have reached the end of that process. However, of those that have, we are aware that there are a number of people who have been dismissed from their post, and I believe that in cases of serious offending, that is important. Because we need to know, all of us need to know, that when we turn to a police officer in a moment of distress, that we are safe and that we can be confident that we will remain safe in doing so.
Terry Carroll, supplementary.
Minister, for answer. Obviously, Sarah Everard, you mentioned that Sabina Nessa and many other women obviously killed tragically on this island. Following those sort of tragic cases, has the Minister reconsidered adopting and implementing a violence against women and girls strategy?
Mr Speaker, I'm slightly bemused by the question. The Executive as a whole has agreed that it will bring forward a violence against women and girls strategy. That was at the behest of my proposition to Executive. Executive agreed they would do so, and that the Executive Office would take a lead on bringing it forward, because it wasn't simply a matter for the Justice Department, but for all departments to tackle violence against women and girls, whether direct or indirect. And so there is a violence against women and girls strategy being developed, but I would encourage the member to ask the Executive Office at their next question time about progress in that regard, as I do regularly at Executive.
Thank you. And I call Pam Cameron.
Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for the answers to the questions so far presented to her. There have been numerous recent instances of individuals charged with offences, including murder and incidents of dissident Republican terrorism, then being granted bail by Northern Irish courts. Does the Minister agree that it's time to review the seemingly very lenient conditions whereby individuals alleged to be involved in terrorism are granted bail?
The decision on whether or not people will be bailed at any stage in the court process is a matter strictly for the judiciary, and not one into which I would wish to wade this afternoon. My intervention in that respect would be neither welcome nor helpful. The decisions and the balances that are taken when it comes to granting bail, I think, are out there in the public domain in terms of the seriousness of the offence, the likelihood of somebody absconding. The flip side of this also needs to be borne in mind, Mr Speaker, is that if people are remanded in custody, they can often end up serving a long time in prison when they have not yet been convicted of any offence. And of course there is a risk that they may never be convicted of any offence as a remand prisoner. And so there is a balance to be struck in terms of public protection and in terms of ensuring that the individual who is accused remains innocent until proven guilty. But that is a balance that has to be struck by the courts and not by me.
Supplementary, Pam Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer, and that leads me on nicely to my supplementary. So another issue in relation to these trials is the unacceptable delays in the legal process. So does the Minister have any plans to help our under-resourced judicial system to ensure it's well staffed and equipped to provide timely progress in cases?
Well, I'm going to take that in two stages. The first is about the plans that we have, and we already had plans in place, Mr Speaker, prior to COVID in terms of speeding up justice, and we were actually seeing those start to bear fruit. In the first quarter of last year, we saw an increase in throughput in the courts and a decrease in waiting times of about 11%, so there was quite a significant change. Of course, COVID has set us back some way, and particularly in terms of the Crown Court, there are real challenges. And in terms of recovery of the Crown Court, I have made a cross-justice bid to the Department of Finance, which has been was funded earlier this year, and we are now working with our partners to ensure that we are working at about 15% above the normal 100% activity level. We have more courtrooms open and operational than was the case before. We're doing more work remotely and in hybrid format, and much more is being done in the courts via administrative procedures. I think that is how we are going to go about recovering the court system. We will find probably the Magistrates' Court recovered reasonably swiftly, so probably by the end of this year. The High Court and the more serious criminal issues that go through the Crown Court is likely to take much longer, and that is simply a reality of the complexity of the cases that they have to deal with and the challenges that they face in doing so. But we are ensuring that our resources, both in terms of court service, but also in terms of the other parts of the justice system, whether it's PSNI, PPS, the judiciary and so on, that we have allocated additional resource to all of them, because there's no point in one part of the system stepping up if other parts of the system lack capacity to follow suit.
The members' time is up, and could members please take your ease for a moment or two?